watching CramerSez.
Welcome. My name is Kramer. This is the CramerSez podcast. It's Thursday, May 16th. Welcome to the show. It's almost the end of the week. We're almost there. I wanted to let you know that before we get into today's show is that the CramerSez podcast, the official CramerSez podcast, is coming back next Monday, May 20th, and it's going to be a little bit different. Yeah, I'm going to scream and yell. Yeah, we're going to talk about news. We're going to have interviews and all that kind of stuff. But the real focus, based on where we are in the country right now, the real focus of the show is going to be preparing you for what happens next. We've heard for the last 4 years that people are looking for leadership. And here's the thing, folks. If you're looking for a leader 2,000 miles away from you to help you in the event that things go sideways in this country, you're not thinking correctly. It's local. Everything that you're going to deal with in the coming months and years is going to be local. I'll give you a great example. A hurricane happens in Texas, or a hurricane happens in Florida. Hurricane hits the western or the eastern shore. If you live in Nevada, that doesn't affect you at all. You've got to be prepared for the things that happen in Nevada. Whether that be a natural occurrence or a man-made occurrence, you have to be prepared, and that's what we're going to be working on. We start with the Constitution, constitutional classes and so on. How do you get informed as to what your rights are and the limited authority, the limited power that the government actually has? How do you utilize your constitutional rights to make them take a step back? We'll be talking about that. That's coming up in the next few weeks. How to join or form a local liberty group. If you don't know what a liberty group is, it's like-minded people that want to get back to constitutional rule, original law rule. Get away from all the regulations and all the stuff that's keeping us down and destroying our nation. We currently live under a fascist state, folks. If you don't realize it, it's time you do. Fascism is when the government controls everything. You own it, but they tell you how you can use it. Now, you tell me, in today's environment, how we're anything other than a fascist state. When you have to ask permission from the government to do everything, including exercising your right to bear arms, your right to speak freely, you're no longer living in a free nation. You're no longer living in a constitutional republic. You're living in a banana republic, a fascist state. So it's time that people start learning exactly where they are, because they will lie to you and lie to you and lie to you, expecting your ignorance to be the biggest weapon they use. So we want to educate you, inform you as to what your rights are and how to use those legally, and how to step forward and push these politicians and these bureaucrats back into the fucking holes that they belong in. We'll also talk about what you need to know about the Constitution, the formation of the Constitution, why it was formed. Not just what it says, but why they did what they did, why our founding fathers chose those words to represent freedom. It's an important schedule. We'll also talk about, the other thing is the constitutional foundation of militias, why militias are so important. It's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not a left-wing conspiracy theory. It's your right as an American citizen to form a militia to protect your community. In the event where things go sideways, you have that constitutional right, but more importantly, you have the authority, and they can't do dick about it. We'll talk about that in the coming weeks as well. Plus all the news and views and interviews about stuff that the mainstream media is ignoring. I'll give you a great example. Over the last few weeks, what have you heard time and time again? Every hour, every day, Trump's on trial, Trump's on trial, Trump's on trial. Did you know that Menendez went on trial on, I think it was Monday? Have you heard anything about that in the news yet? You know, the guy who had the gold bars at home. Had a car, had $175,000 in cash, just sitting around, money they had saved. You know, they had to hold away for a rainy day. But he can't explain where the money came from because he only makes $174,000 a year. Menendez has been caught with cash before. They let him go. He ran for office again. He won, and he continued what was working for him. Did you hear anything about that in the news in the last few days? No, you haven't. Because it's not about news. It's not about the mainstream media. It's about destroying America. And the only person right now standing in their path that can stop them, potentially, is Donald J. Trump. So no, you're not going to hear about the news that harms them or affects them or makes them look bad. They're not going to showcase that because they're not journalists. They're propagandists. And that's why what we're doing in the next few weeks is so exciting. I can't wait to tell you about it. We have a huge announcement to make on Monday, by the way. You'll want to be there for the show. It's not anything that has been done before. Well, I shouldn't say it hasn't been done before. It's been done before. It's been tried before, but unsuccessfully. And we think that we realize the reason is because of how it was structured, and that's why your joining in what we're doing is so important. So we'll talk about that on Monday. All that and more. It all starts on Monday. So everything starts on Monday. On today's show, like I said earlier, we've got a great speech from Ronald Reagan from 1964. It's called The Myth of the Great Society. And as you listen, I want you to pay attention to the similarities of what he's talking about and what he's saying is going to happen, or the situation that they're in and the spending that was going on back then, and how similar it is to what we're going through today. If you know anything about economics, what they're doing spending-wise is unsustainable. Just a few weeks ago, Congress went through and approved a $1.2 trillion spending bill, to fill the gap. And now they're going to have to do it again in about 4 weeks. Another stimulus bill of more printed money in the streets, raising prices. It won't happen immediately. No, you'll see that in about a year and a half. It only gets worse if you don't get involved. So this speech is important. It tells you that we've been battling this for the last 60 years. And the issue that I want to bring to your mind is you have to become involved for things to get fixed. If you've got a bad car, it's not working, it's out in the driveway, and you leave it alone for 6 months, you go back 6 months later, guess what? That car didn't fix itself. And that's what we're asking Congress to do. We're asking the broken machine to fix itself. It's impossible. You have to get involved. So we'll get into that right after this.
America's political prisoners need our help. CramerSez is on a mission to raise $100,000 or more. Can you help? Join our mission today at CramerSez.shop. You're watching CramerSez.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I haven't even announced yet, and you make me think I've been elected. But, ladies and gentlemen, you have given me a welcome that is so heartwarming, it's something I will remember always. In addition, if I had no such reasons at all to be happy about the form of the greeting and the introductions and all here tonight, I could be grateful, because every once in a while, being introduced, I get self-conscious when they begin to introduce me and start mentioning the pictures that I've been in. Now, I don't mean that I'm ashamed of them, but everyone who's been around Hollywood for any length of time has been in some movies that the studio didn't want them good, it wanted them Thursday. And I've had my share. But in the old times, you usually could count on the passing years making you forget those pictures. Now you just stay up late enough at night in front of the TV set and they all come back to haunt us. Sometimes I think it's like looking at a son you never knew you had. That takes a second, doesn't it? I have a friend in the business who stays up late to look at his old movies just to watch his hairline recede. But you know, I've been protesting the growth of government for a number of years. I've had a concern lest the permanent structure of government becomes so big that it would become beyond the control of Congress and beyond the will of the people. And I have believed that this is a problem that crosses party lines. I've seen an interesting development down through the years. When I first suggested the danger of government control inherent in so many federal handouts, there were people who denied vehemently that any such thing could ever take place. And yet, before too long, the same people were saying, what's wrong with government control? And in the recent days, we've heard representatives in the higher echelons of government ask us, well, are you afraid of your own government? Well, to tell you the truth, I am. And all of us should be. And I speak not in a partisan sense of an administration or individuals. I'm talking of the institution of government. Wasn't this the admonition of the Founding Fathers, that government tends to grow, to take on power, until freedom eventually is lost? The fact is, and we can't escape it, only government is capable of tyranny. Now, I realize this is a controversial subject, particularly as we approach an election year. But then if you didn't take up things that were controversial, you'd never talk at all. There was a man knocked on a door one day, and a small boy answered, and the man said, son, is your father home? And the boy said, no. He said, is your mother home? And the boy said, no. And finally he said, well, son, I'm your uncle on your father's side. And the kid said, well, I guess you can come in, but I'll tell you right now, you're on the wrong side. In 1772, the Boston Committee of Correspondence proclaimed the right to life, liberty, and property. 2 years later, in Philadelphia, the First Continental Congress declared that Americans were entitled to life, liberty, and property. In June of 1776, the Virginia Bill of Rights asserted that all men were equally free and independent, with the means of possessing and the right to possess and acquire property. And 3 weeks later came the Declaration of Independence, a bloody war, victory, and then a new nation which would be based on a Constitution and a Bill of Rights. Life, liberty, and property had become life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And 70 years would go by before England's Lord Acton would comment on the task of these men and what they had accomplished with this document. He would say they had solved two problems which had heretofore baffled the most enlightened nations. They had prodigiously increased the power of the national government and had founded it on the principle of equality without surrendering the security for freedom and property. And it's true. Our Constitution is a contract guaranteeing the most limited and equitable government in the long history of man's relation to man. Now, however, while the national power is prodigious, what has happened to security for freedom and our right to the ownership of the fruit of our toil? The French philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville 100 years ago said the end of freedom comes when the party in power learns it can perpetuate itself through taxation. Well, what does happen to freedom when the executive branch of government can use the money taken from the people in order to coerce the people? A foolish fear? Representative Glenn Andrews introduced an amendment to the poverty program on the floor of Congress. It is almost inconceivable that such an amendment would be required. It is even more inconceivable that the amendment was overwhelmingly repudiated and defeated. It was a simple amendment that would prohibit poverty funds from being used for political purposes. Make no mistake about it. The party in power has legislated into existence a $1.8 billion campaign fund for 1966. Five years ago, we reached a new frontier, and now we're face to face with a great society, and along the way, we've added $31 billion to our debt, but we've decreased our gold holdings until concern is felt for the solvency of our currency. And very shortly, the coins we jingle in our pocket will no longer have the ring of silver. But have no fear. We reached something of the height of absurdity when in a press conference recently we were told that the government would stand behind those artificial coins and was prepared to exchange them anytime for paper. We've discovered that every family with an income of less than $3,000 a year is poverty-stricken. At the same time, we learn that the cost of government prorates out to $3,300 per family. We reach an all-time high in food prices, as every housewife here knows. But the farmer who produces that food receives the lowest percentage of the market basket dollar he's ever received in history. And his debt in relation to income is at an all-time high, higher even than on the eve of the 1929 crash. 4.5 years ago, 5 years ago, there were no daily casualty lists. No wives and mothers receiving telegrams that began, "We regret to inform you." The last campaign found our opponents presenting themselves as conservatives in the sense that they would make no drastic change in our easy, prosperous, and affluent way. They would maintain the status quo. That's Latin for the mess we're in.
Kramer Says. We'll be right back after these messages. Kramer Says is everywhere. Twitter, Truth, Instagram, and always on America's fastest growing free speech platform, Kramer Says Social. Make your free account today at CramerSez.com. You're watching Kramer Says.
We, on the other hand, were presented as radicals who'd bring about some cataclysmic upheaval. Well, now the wraps are off the Great Society, and a multitude of messages and legislation has made it plain we're to have the welfare state with an unprecedented federalization of American life. June 30th last, Congress raised the debt limit for the 7th time in 5 years. But our government spends $260 million a day, $10 million more each day than we were spending just a year ago. We're told that we're enjoying an unprecedented prosperity. But 42 government agencies, the government has just informed us, are spending $70 billion a year on public welfare. And serious discussion is given by men in high place in government to the idea that there is no longer any necessity to connect work with income, and that a man simply by being born should be assured of an annual income with no need to work. The ancient Hebrew book, the Talmud, tells us that for a father to fail to teach his son to earn a living is the same as teaching him to steal, for that might be the inevitable result. Our limited government with its decentralized powers has given way to planners, and they've laid an increasingly heavy hand on every facet of our lives. To quote de Tocqueville again, he warned that such a government would cover the face of society with a network of small, complicated rules, minute and uniform, and thus the will of man is not shattered, but softened and guided until the nation is reduced to a flock of timid and industrious animals, of which government is the shepherd. Well, the shepherd, the president, is fond of quoting in these days from the scriptures. His favorite seems to be 1 Isaiah, the 18th verse. Come, let us reason together. Now that has a sort of a warm and cozy sound, doesn't it? But let your eyes stray down a line or two into the next verses, the lines that are not quoted aloud. If ye refuse, ye shall be devoured with the sword. Freedom is very fragile. We've only known a few moments of it in all man's history. And most of those moments have taken place here, in this land, under this constitutional system and under our economic system of free enterprise. But freedom is also indivisible. It isn't spelled with an S. You can't elect to be partly free and partly slave. You're free or you're not free. If we ever decide we need a new Declaration of Independence, I hope we'll keep one line from the old. He has sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Today, for every 10,000 of us, it only takes 12 doctors to keep us well and healthy. It only takes 40 mechanics and oil station attendants for every 10,000 of us to keep our automobiles running. 37 telephone employees to keep the vast network of telephones running in this country. But it takes 130 federal employees for every 10,000 to administer the affairs of state. Federal employees outnumber state employees in 30 of the 50 states. I don't know about yours, but that's true of California, and in California, that isn't easy. The businessman, harassed and eaten out of our substance, the businessman spends 35% of his time filling out government forms and regulations. It has been estimated that this government paperwork costs American industry $20 billion a year, which must be added into the price tag. And it costs another $7 billion a year just to handle government's end of that paperwork and to store it, and already it requires 25 million cubic feet. Some time back, to show you how this can happen, there was a little New England town that decided to get in on the surplus food idea. Now, this is a good idea. No one can quarrel with the fact that if we can raise a surplus rather than waste it, it should be distributed to those people who have need. So this little town got in on this and got its share of free federal surplus food. And then they woke up one day and discovered that they were being flooded under a great load of paperwork demanded in connection with this handout. And they discovered finally they'd put on so many new city employees just to handle this that it was cheaper to get out of the program and buy the groceries retail at the corner market. Now we've declared war on poverty. Now no one again quarrels with the humanitarian aim. I don't think any one of us want to be like the fellow that heard about the war on poverty and went right out and threw a hand grenade at a beggar. But in getting the program passed, we heard a great deal about one state, West Virginia. Oh, this became a household word. This was the very center of poverty and distress and unemployment. Some of us thought that the whole war would be fought right there in West Virginia. Now the program is adopted. West Virginia gets $400,000. Texas gets $10 million. We're winning the war, though, at least on one front, on their own bureaucratic home grounds. $19,000 a year is a good salary, and it's a very high rate of pay in government salaries. As a matter of fact, there's only one employee out of 1,000 in the Department of Defense gets $19,000 a year. Only 1 out of 500 in the Department of Agriculture. But in the new poverty program, there's 1 out of 19. Gum Springs, Virginia was awarded $74,000, $54,000 for administrators' salaries, $20,000 for the poor. While one voice in government tells us that we're enjoying this great prosperity, another voice tells us that 1 out of 5 in our country is suffering from poverty and destitution. Now, if that figure's true, it shouldn't be too hard to find the people who need the help under this program. Well, in my hometown of Dixon, Illinois, a committee of 10, self-appointed, beholden to no voters, has established itself and asked the government for a $38,000 grant so they can go on a search to find out if there's any poverty there. It breaks down to $10,200 for the chairman and $7,200 each for 2 assistants, and the balance will go for secretaries, mailing, office expense, and travel. In another area, More than 2,000 college graduates have been hired as a part of the program to study the culture of poverty. Now, no one disagrees with the youth portion of that program. The idea that we should salvage, if possible, those young people who, for whatever reason, have failed to fit themselves for the responsibilities of adult life. But we take over a hotel and we install there young ladies who have been lifted from destitute families, and now they're to be trained so they'll be self-reliant and can go out on their own and make a living. But while they're being retrained, they're given maid service so they won't have to make their own beds. And the program prorates out to $7,000 a year for each young lady we're going to help. There are a lot of families in this country raising fine, productive citizens on less than $7,000 a year.
Kramer Says. We'll be right back after these messages. America's political prisoners need our help. Kramer Says is on a mission to raise $100,000 or more. Can you help? Join our mission today at CramerSez.shop. You're watching Kramer Says.
I can think of no higher, more noble purpose than to take young men and to make sure that they get an equal chance in the start in life. But we have such a program now, and we put the young men in camps for retraining, and we pay them a higher rate of pay than we give the young man who puts on a uniform and goes out to defend his country. I am sure that all of us are agreed, every responsible citizen is agreed, that we should provide shelter for those people who, through no fault of their own, lack adequate housing. And for some time, the government has provided public housing. But now those who administer the program have expressed concern after almost 3 decades of it. Concern because an entire generation has grown up, raising children. And a second and a third generation now are growing up taking it for granted that this is an acceptable way of life. And there is no incentive for them to improve themselves, because to get a raise might destroy their eligibility for continuing to live on a subsidy in the public housing. And yet, never does government accept that it might be responsible with some of its programs for this trend or this tendency. No. Now we're going to have a program subsidizing rents. And under the technicalities of the program, people with incomes up to $11,000 or $12,000 a year will be eligible to live in a house or apartment or a neighborhood beyond their means with their thrifty new neighbors, taxed to help pay the differential in their rent. A variety of programs have diluted private property rights so that public interest is anything the planners decide it should be. For generations, we've had traditional laws of eminent domain. We have recognized the occasional need of government to take a citizen's property when there is a clear and present need for that particular piece of property in the public interest. But the citizen had his day in court, first to establish that the government paid a fair price, and second, that the government should be forced to prove that there was a clear and present need. Now, urban renewal grants the government the right to force the sale of private property for resale by government to other private citizens who can then use that property to make profit. And we have averaged selling urban renewal properties to private citizens for 30% of the investment that we, the taxpayers, have in that property. Again, I say the purpose is noble. The idea of providing decent homes for every American and eliminating slums. But 1 million people have been displaced with a bulldozer and have wound up in new slums paying a higher rent. The law says the displaced must be offered standard housing at rents they can afford in convenient locations. But if standard housing at rents they could afford in convenient locations had been available, they wouldn't have needed an urban renewal program. They'd have moved there on their own. Robert Weaver, the Federal Housing Commissioner, has said in the beginning, he has made this statement public, the government gave the use of the land to the people to speed its development. Now, I didn't remember history that way. I thought we were here and on the land and we created the government. But he says, but he has announced now, it is the policy of the government to seek to reclaim complete control of the use of the land. Planes equipped with surveying instruments fly over American farms. They survey from the air accurately to see whether the farmer has violated his planting allotment. And if he has, he's guilty as charged. No day in court, and he's fined, and if he can't pay the fine, the regulations prescribe the government can seize his farm and sell it at auction to enforce the payment of that fine. For 30 years, we've had a farm program. We've spent billions to make the farmer more prosperous and to remove unneeded surplus land from farm production, to reduce the surplus. And during that same period, the national income has tripled, but the farmer's income is smaller than it was 30 years ago. And we've increased the number of acres in cultivation by 50 million. Every dollar that we spent on price stabilization in 1948, we are today spending $25. We've reduced the number of farmers by half, and the government says another 2.5 million farmers are unneeded and must be retrained and moved to city jobs. Meanwhile, at the same time, the Appalachian program provides millions of dollars to reclaim marginal land so that the unemployed can be made farmers in that area and add to the present farm surplus. And an ominous question remains unanswered. Who will decide which citizens must leave the land? And how will the decision be made? How also will we explain that the same government that says that we need only 1 million large commercial farms now, that there is no need for the small family farmer, is still the government that tells us with another voice that no farm of over 100